The light above my desk hummed softly, the same steady buzz it had made every morning for the last 15 years. Today, it sounded different, like a countdown. I stood in my office. Glass walls, city skyline, a view I'd earned line by line of code. And for a moment, I let the silence breathe. My mug, chipped on the rim, sat next to the monitor still logged into the system I had built from scratch. On the bookshelf, the photo from our first team retreat leaned slightly askew. The founder's arm around my shoulder, both of us younger, hungrier, hopeful. It was strange how easily history fit inside a single frame. Outside my office, I could hear the forced laughter of people pretending nothing was happening. Word travels fast in a company that runs on gossip and caffeine. 15 years of loyalty, commitment, late nights and weekends, about to be erased by a man who'd been here for 7 weeks. The notification pinged at 9:12 a.m., sharp. "Melissa, please step into the CEO's office for a quick chat." From Executive Assistant. Quick chat. That's corporate code for prepare to be replaced. I closed my laptop softly, as if not to wake it. Picked up my mug, my notebook, and walked down the hall. The smiles I passed felt like static. Empty, buzzing, insincere. When I reached the double glass doors, I could already see him. Daniel Pierce, the new CEO, mid-30s, hair too perfect, shoes too clean. He sat behind the founder's old desk, spinning a pen like he was deciding whether to sign my fate or doodle through it. HR was already there. Of course, 2 of them. Always 2, like vultures in matching beige. "Melissa," Daniel said with the kind of grin that tried too hard. "Come in, have a seat." I stayed standing. "I prefer to stand." He leaned back. "Suit yourself." He didn't bother with small talk. He was the kind of man who mistook cruelty for efficiency. "We're making some changes," he began, tone rehearsed. "Modernization, optimization, fresh leadership. You've done incredible work here, but the board agrees it's time for new energy." Translation: "You're too experienced to manipulate." He gestured toward HR. "You'll receive a generous severance, 3 months' salary, continued healthcare coverage. Security will escort you out once we're done here." He smiled as if expecting gratitude. I didn't give him that. I just said calmly, "Good luck." He blinked, caught off guard by my composure. "Excuse me?" I placed my access badge on the table right next to the contract I had printed that morning, just in case. "You'll need this," I said, "to get through the doors I designed." Then I turned, walked out, and let the door whisper shut behind me. The hallway felt longer than usual. My heels echoed against the tile, each step marking the end of an era. I passed the server room. The hum of the machines behind the glass felt almost alive. Those servers had been my heartbeat for over a decade. I could still tell when something was off just by the pitch of the fan. No one looked up as I passed. It's easier to avoid guilt that way. When I reached my office, I paused, took one last look around, and flipped the light switch. Click. A soft, familiar sound. The end of one story. The beginning of another. By 10:03 a.m., I was sitting in my car in the parking lot, rain tapping the windshield. My phone buzzed nonstop. Slack messages, emails, meeting invites I was already locked out of. I powered it off. There's a kind of peace that comes when you know exactly what they've done wrong, and that they don't. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small navy blue folder, worn at the edges. Inside were notarized papers, old contracts, and one very important clause from 2010. All proprietary software developed under Project Core shall remain intellectual property of the author, Melissa R. Danner, until formal transfer of ownership is executed in writing. The transfer had never been executed, because no one ever thought I'd leave. By 10:37 a.m., I was seated in a quiet cafe 2 blocks away, the same one I'd written the first lines of our security architecture in years ago. The barista still remembered my order. Black coffee, 1 sugar. I took the corner seat, the one near the outlet, and opened my laptop. The rain had turned to mist outside, soft against the glass. My inbox was full. Some goodbye messages, some pity. But one stood out. From Dave Shaw, founder. Subject: Wait, what happened? I smiled faintly. Dave, the man who once called me the spine of the company. I typed slowly. Ask your new CEO. Then I closed the laptop and took a long sip of coffee. Across the street, I could see the reflection of the office building where Daniel Pierce was probably giving a victory speech to a room full of yes men. He thought it was over, but it wasn't the end. It was 10:59 a.m., and in 1 minute, the servers would start rejecting every new access request. Not because I sabotaged them, because they no longer recognized anyone but me. At 11 a.m., sharp, my phone, lying face down beside my empty coffee cup, started buzzing so violently it almost tipped over. Then it stopped. Then it started again. 20 calls, then 40. By the time it hit 158 missed calls, I already knew what was happening. When a system as complex as ours goes dark, it doesn't explode. It fractures. Quietly, invisibly, one access denial at a time. I opened my laptop and navigated to the company's public status page. Partial outage. Core services affected. Of course they were. The architecture I'd built wasn't designed to punish anyone. It was designed to protect itself. The licensing core verified ownership signatures every 30 days. That ownership was tied, legally and technically, to one name. Mine. I'd told them for years we needed to update the assignment clause. I'd even sent reminders. They never replied. Legacy documentation, Daniel had once called it. Well, legacy was talking now. Back at headquarters, chaos was brewing. At 11:03, the customer support portal rejected all logins. At 11:08, the DevOps dashboard showed access revoked, insufficient permission. By 11:11, 3 government clients couldn't generate compliance reports. Somewhere, an intern probably tried to reboot the system. They always do. But you can't reboot ownership. My phone vibrated again. Unknown number. I ignored it. Then it buzzed once more. Same number. And again. Finally, I sighed and answered. Melissa, came the voice, rough, urgent. Dave. Hi, Dave. What the hell is going on? The system's rejecting everyone. Legal's screaming. Clients are calling nonstop. Daniel says it's a technical issue, some sort of permissions bug. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It's not a bug. Then what is it? A clause, I said simply. Silence. Then a sharp exhale. Please tell me you're joking. I told you in 2010, I said calmly, that the IP assignment was never executed. Everything under Project Core still falls under my license. You remember that? I thought we fixed it years ago. You thought wrong. He didn't speak for several seconds. I could hear chatter and footsteps behind him, muffled panic. Someone yelling in the background. None of the admin keys are working. Finally, he said, low and strained, Daniel's losing it. He's in the server room right now, screaming at IT. He said something about calling the police. I almost laughed. Tell him to read the contract before he calls 911. At 11:30, the company Slack channels started leaking screenshots. Developers posting error logs, snippets of code, frantic messages like, who changed the root key? This signature check is rejecting everyone. Does anyone still have contact with Melissa? They were trying to reach me, of course, but my company email was deactivated. My personal one wasn't. I checked it. 47 new messages, most of them desperate. From HR, from legal, from Daniel himself. The last one just said, whatever this is, undo it. Now I didn't reply. By noon, things were unraveling publicly. A trade site had already picked up the outage. Tech giant Core Axis facing major system disruption. Internal sources cite licensing error. I smiled faintly. They called it an error, not yet a reckoning. I leaned back in my chair. The cafe quiet around me except for the sound of milk steaming behind the counter. Outside, rain streaked the window like static. The truth was, I hadn't locked them out of spite. The system was just doing exactly what I'd written it to do: verify the rightful owner. And right now, that wasn't them. At 12:04, Dave called again. His tone was different. Hoarse, defeated. "They're saying you own the software outright," he said. "Is that true?" "Yes." "For God's sake, Melissa, why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I did," I said softly. "Multiple times. You just stopped reading my emails after Daniel came in." He went quiet again. Then, "What are you going to do?" "Nothing reckless," I said. "I'm not deleting a line of code. I'm just waiting for the lawyers to read Clause 9b. What's in Clause 9b? It says that any use of my intellectual property without a valid licensing agreement constitutes breach of contract. Automatic revocation of rights." I heard him swallow hard. That means they're not allowed to run a single process until it's resolved. He cursed under his breath. "Melissa, this could sink us." "No, Dave," I said quietly. "Firing me did that." When the call ended, I opened the old folder again, the one that had lived in my drawer for a decade. Inside, I had everything: contracts, invoices, emails, notarized signatures, even the timestamped transfer draft they'd never executed. I ran my fingers across the embossed title at the top. Core Access IP Agreement. Initial Development 2010. It still smelled faintly of ink and printer paper. By 12:45, my inbox pinged again. From legal@coreaccess.com. Urgent, requesting immediate meeting to resolve IP ownership. Founder involved. Please confirm availability. I didn't respond. Not yet. I closed my laptop, looked out at the street, and whispered to no one in particular. They'll learn that ownership isn't something you can terminate. Then I finished my coffee, stood, and walked toward the door. The cafe bell chimed softly as I left, right as my phone lit up again, this time with a voicemail from Dave. "Melissa, the founder just called from London. He's furious. He just yelled, 'Who the hell let her own our $600 million software?' Call me back." Please, I didn't. Instead, I drove home, because the next move wasn't theirs. It was mine. By the time I woke the next morning, my phone was a battlefield of missed calls and unread messages. Dave, legal, even Daniel, all of them trying to reach me. I didn't answer any of them. Not yet. At 8:15 a.m., my inbox pinged with a new subject line. Emergency board meeting, mandatory attendance, Core Access Systems. The invitation was forwarded by Dave, marked URGENT. Part of me wanted to ignore it, make them sweat. But another part, the part that had built that company from a flickering laptop and a secondhand router, wanted to hear what they'd say when they realized the truth. So, I brewed my coffee, opened my laptop, and joined the Zoom call. The screen filled with tense faces. Daniel was there, jaw tight, tie crooked, eyes red from what looked like a sleepless night. Dave looked older than I remembered. Creased forehead, tired eyes. And on the main screen, calling in from London, was Richard Mullen, the founder. He looked furious enough to combust. The call was already in motion when I joined. "We need answers." Richard's voice thundered through my speakers. "How does one woman, a terminated employee, have full legal ownership of our entire software infrastructure?" Daniel tried to respond, voice shaky but defiant. It's a misunderstanding. We're working on a new agreement. Our lawyers believe we can reassign the IP once we what?" Richard snapped. "Once we beg her to give it back?" The silence that followed was the kind you could feel in your chest. Then Dave spoke quietly. "Melissa's here." All eyes turned toward my little square on the screen. "Morning," I said evenly. Daniel's expression hardened. "Melissa, whatever game you're playing, it's not a game," I interrupted. "It's paperwork. Something you should have read before signing termination letters." Richard leaned forward, his tone cooling but sharp. Melissa, I built this company from nothing. You were part of that. We all were. But this situation is untenable. You're claiming ownership over the software that runs every major client contract we have. I'm not claiming anything, I said calmly. I own it. You have the documents in front of you. Clause 12B, intellectual property retention. It was never reassigned. You all operated under implied use. But implied use isn't ownership. Legal counsel, a man named Patel, cleared his throat. She's correct, he said reluctantly. The agreement from 2010 gives her full IP rights until a formal transfer is executed. That never happened. Daniel slammed his palm against the table. That's absurd. She wrote code under company resources. Patel adjusted his glasses. At the time, the company wasn't formally incorporated. She was working as an independent contractor under a deferred salary model. Her contract explicitly stated ownership retention until equity conversion, something that, according to the records, was never finalized. Richard's glare shifted from me to Daniel. You said all this was handled when you joined. That's what you told the board. Daniel's voice rose. It wasn't my job to review decade-old documents. Actually, I said softly, it was. Dave finally spoke, voice low but steady. She warned us, Richard. More than once. I remember her emails. We just didn't prioritize it. Richard's face darkened. So let me get this straight. We've been selling and deploying software for years, software that legally belongs to Melissa. And if she wanted to, she could revoke our right to use it immediately? Yes, Patel said grimly. That's exactly right. The room fell into another silence. Daniel's shoulders slumped. So what do we do now? Richard's tone cut like steel. We fix it. He turned toward me. Melissa, what do you want? I let the question hang there for a beat too long, watching Daniel fidget in his chair. What I want, I began slowly, is acknowledgement. For 15 years, I built that platform. Every feature, every security patch, every crisis fix that saved your contracts. I did that. And when you decided to replace me with a man who couldn't tell a server log from a salad menu, you didn't just fire me. You insulted the foundation of your own company. Richard rubbed his temples. You're angry. I understand, but there's a company at stake here. Then you should have treated the people who built it like more than disposable code, Patel interjected. Melissa, if you're open to negotiation, we can discuss a licensing agreement, exclusive with royalties and advisory rights. That would allow operations to resume immediately. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I watched Daniel's expression, panic struggling to hide behind arrogance. Melissa, he said suddenly, be reasonable. You can't hold an entire company hostage just because you feel slighted. I smiled faintly. Daniel, this isn't revenge. This is accountability. Dave looked straight into the camera. Melissa, can you give us 24 hours to prepare a proposal? Fine, I said. But after that, I'm not the one who'll be negotiating. My attorney, Will Richard, nodded stiffly. Understood. We'll be in touch. The call ended. I sat back, staring at my reflection in the black screen. My heart was steady, not vengeful, not triumphant, just calm. I'd spent 15 years being the quiet one, the fixer, the invisible architect. They thought firing me was cutting fat. They never realized they'd just amputated the backbone. At 9:47 a.m., a new email arrived from Patel. Melissa, please confirm your lawyer's contact information. We'll begin discussions immediately. I typed back one sentence. He'll call you first. Then I closed the laptop and whispered half to myself. They wanted modernization. I'm just giving it to them. The next morning started without an alarm. I woke naturally. No calendar invites, no Slack notifications, no urgent pings about someone else's mistake. Just silence and the faint hum of rain against my window. It felt strange, almost luxurious, to not belong to anyone's schedule. By 8 a.m., my lawyer, Mark Henley, was already in my kitchen. He was one of those lawyers who spoke slowly but thought fast, the kind who always looked like he knew more than he said. A friend had introduced us years ago, back when I was still naive enough to believe loyalty protected you. He sat across from me at the table, glasses perched low on his nose, reviewing the red folder I'd pulled from my bag, the one with the original contract. When he finished reading, he exhaled through his nose and said, "Melissa, this is airtight. They don't own a single line of your code." I nodded. I know. He tapped the papers. "The question is, what do you want from them? Because once I make the call, you'll have their full attention." I thought for a moment. "I don't want revenge," I said finally. "I just want respect. And terms that make sure they can never do this to anyone again." Mark smiled faintly. "Then let's make that expensive for them." At 9:42 a.m., he dialed into the board's conference line. I sat beside him, coffee in hand, listening on speaker. "Good morning," he began smoothly. "This is Mark Henley, counsel for Melissa Danner. Before we begin, I'd like to confirm that this call is being recorded." A pause. Then a flustered voice. Patel, the company's counsel, answered, "Yes, that's fine." "Good," Mark said. "Let's discuss licensing." Daniel's voice broke through, brittle and defensive. "This whole thing is absurd. We can't just—" "Daniel," Mark interrupted, polite but sharp. "If you speak, make sure it's useful." That shut him up. Mark continued. "Here's what my client proposes. Core Access will enter a 3-year exclusive licensing agreement for the use of her software infrastructure. The licensing fee will be $80 million upfront, plus 10% royalties on all new client deployments using her code. In addition, Ms. Danner will hold an advisory seat to oversee any future architectural modifications. Finally, the company will issue a public statement clarifying that her termination was an internal miscommunication, not performance-related silence." Then came a low, incredulous laugh. Richard, the founder, calling from London. $80 million? You can't be serious, Mark didn't blink. "If you'd like to rebuild the system from scratch, you're welcome to try. My client's code base covers authentication, infrastructure routing, and API encryption. Without those, your product is just a login screen, and a logo." Patel cleared his throat. "We'll need time to review these numbers." "You have 24 hours, Mark said. "After that, Ms. Danner reserves the right to suspend all implied licenses, meaning your company will be in violation of Clause 9B. That could invite litigation from your own clients. Federal, even." Richard cursed softly under his breath. Dave's voice came next, tired but calm. "Mark, I think we can work something out. Can you send over a draft?" "Already did," Mark replied. "Check your inbox." I watched through the kitchen window as Mark spoke, rainwater trickling down the glass like quiet punctuation to every word. There was no shouting, no drama, just calm precision. By the time the call ended, they'd agreed to review the proposal immediately. That afternoon, I took a walk downtown. The air smelled like wet pavement and diesel, the city still shaking off last night's storm. My phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Dave. "For what it's worth, you were right about Daniel. He's unraveling. The board's furious. I'm sorry it took this to make us listen." I typed back, "It's not about being right. It's about being seen." He didn't reply, but a few minutes later, I got another message from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." I didn't need to ask who it was. Daniel's ego could be recognized from space. I didn't answer him. I just put my phone away and kept walking. By 6 p.m., Mark called again. "They've accepted the core terms," he said. "We're finalizing the paperwork in the morning, but there's one condition from your side I'd like to clarify before I send the final draft." "Which one?" I asked. "The clause you added, removal of Daniel Pierce from operational authority. You still want that in?" I hesitated for half a second. "Yes." "Good. Mark said, because after today's meeting, they probably want it too. That night, I sat on my balcony watching the lights of the city flicker. Somewhere out there, in a downtown office full of glass and panic, they were reading every word of the licensing proposal. 15 years of loyalty, erased by arrogance, and now rewritten line by line under my name. It didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like correction. I opened my laptop, reread the draft one last time, and smiled when I reached the last line. All proprietary technology licensed under this agreement shall retain the author's original credit and architectural oversight. I closed the document and whispered, architect. Not legacy. Not replaceable. Architect. The next morning began gray and still. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel tense opening my email. I knew what would be waiting there. The final agreement, wrapped in legal polish and desperation. At 8:12 a.m., the subject line appeared. Core Access Licensing Agreement, final draft for execution. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and opened the document. Every clause Mark and I had written was there, untouched. The $80 million payment, the 10% royalty, the public statement, and, right at the end, Clause 14. Effective immediately upon execution, Daniel Pierce will be relieved of all operational authority within Core Access Systems. Below that, my name was printed in black and white. Melissa R. Danner, proprietor and chief architect, Core Infrastructure. For a moment, I just stared at it. 15 years of silence and invisibility, reduced to a few typed lines that finally recognized what I'd built. I signed, scanned, and sent it back to Mark. By noon, the agreement was fully executed. The funds hit escrow. Core Access could legally run again. At 12:14, Dave called. It's done, he said quietly. The board signed everything. Richard approved the transfer from London himself. Good, I said. Then he added, they're holding an emergency shareholder meeting in an hour. Daniel's on the chopping block. I don't need to hear it, I replied. Maybe not, he said. But you should know. When Richard saw the public statement draft, he asked who wrote it. I told him you did. I smiled faintly. Then he'll understand it wasn't written in anger. An hour later, the press release went live. Core Access Systems announces strategic partnership with software architect Melissa Danner. Core Access Systems has entered an exclusive 3-year licensing agreement with Redline Technologies, owned and operated by architect Melissa Danner, who originally developed the company's proprietary infrastructure. The termination of Ms. Danner's employment last month was due to internal miscommunication, not performance-related reasons. The board expresses its deep appreciation for her contributions and looks forward to her advisory involvement moving forward. The words were diplomatic, clinical, almost sterile, but I could read the truth between the lines. They weren't partnering with me. They were renting back their own foundation. Around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Dave. His voice was low, cautious. They just asked Daniel to resign. It wasn't pretty, I said nothing. He tried to blame everyone. Legal, HR, even me. When Richard confronted him about the missing IP transfer, he started shouting about legacy code and old staff who couldn't evolve. Richard told him to pack his things. Silence hung between us. Melissa, Dave said softly, for what it's worth, I'm glad it was you. You deserved better than how we treated you. Dave, I said, you don't owe me anything. Just make sure the next person who builds something for you doesn't have to fight this hard to be seen. He exhaled. Fair enough. That evening, I returned to the building for the first time since the day I was escorted out. It felt surreal walking through the lobby again. Same security desk, same elevator chime, same faint smell of burnt coffee. The receptionist looked up, startled. Miss Danner, I didn't realize you were... Just visiting, I said. Upstairs, the floor was eerily quiet. Most people were gone for the day, but a few faces still glanced up as I passed, recognition flashing across their eyes. No hostility, just something like respect. My old office door was still there, Nameplate removed, but the space was untouched. Even the small potted fern I'd left behind sat on the shelf. Half alive, hanging on, stubborn. I stepped inside, flicked the light switch. Click. Same sound. Same glow. The room looked smaller than I remembered, maybe because I wasn't afraid of losing it anymore. I ran my hand across the desk, then over the photo that still sat there. The one of me and Dave and the two original founders, long before the titles and politics. We were smiling. It almost hurt to look at it. Then I noticed something new. A printed memo left on the chair. "Welcome back, Melissa. Your advisory credentials have been activated. Board meeting next week. Coffee's on us." I smiled despite myself. When I left the office, the sun had finally broken through the clouds. The city glimmered in the glass towers around me, rainwater drying on the pavement. For a long time, I stood there just watching people hurry past. Interns, analysts, coders, each of them chasing deadlines that used to be mine. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. I wasn't coming back to rebuild. I was coming back to protect. Mark called one last time before I drove home. "Congratulations," he said. "You played it perfectly." I laughed softly. I didn't play anything. I just followed the rules they ignored. He chuckled. That's usually how the best wins happen. As I got into my car, I glanced up one last time at the building. Behind those glass walls, they were probably rebooting systems, restarting servers, checking logs. And somewhere on every startup screen, a small credit line appeared. One they'd never bothered to notice before. Infrastructure design by M.R. Danner. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even need gratitude. All I wanted was for them to remember who built what they stood on. I turned the key, the engine humming to life. And as I drove away, I whispered the same words I'd said the day Daniel fired me. Words that had turned out to be prophecy. Good luck. I knew something was off the moment the HR intern, Rachel, started avoiding eye contact in the hallway. She used to smile, that overly rehearsed kind of smile that came with her weekly team spirit emails. But that morning, she clutched her coffee like it was a security blanket and mumbled, "Morning," without meeting my eyes. The air in our office always smelled faintly like lemon disinfectant and panic, a mix of stress and fake cleanliness. I worked in finance audit at Larkwell Industries, a place where fluorescent lights hummed louder than people did. Precision was my job. Numbers, forms, timestamps. I was the one who made sure we didn't accidentally commit federal fraud by forgetting to check a box on a compliance report. Glamorous, I know. I'd been there 8 years, never missed a deadline, never caused a scene, never even used a sick day unless I had the medical note to prove it. And yet, that Friday at exactly 9:02 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message that would end everything. From HR department subject, company update, policy violation notice attachment, IMG_4751.jpg. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was my photo, my ID badge headshot. Below it, in bold red letters, fired for leaving 2 minutes early. Do not rehire. The email had been sent to everyone, every department, every contractor, even the company mailing list that reached our external partners. 2 minutes early. 2. I just stared at it for a solid minute, unable to move, while the chat notifications started exploding. What the fuck? Is this real? HR gone wild? Someone even reacted with a laughing emoji. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt hollow, like someone had taken a vacuum to my chest. I minimized the email and checked my timesheet. Thursday, clocked out at 4:58 p.m. We'd been told repeatedly that as long as we worked our full 40 hours, flexible exit within 5 minutes was fine. Even my manager, Carl, had said, "Don't stress about it." Except Carl wasn't answering his phone now. At 9:15, I heard footsteps, deliberate, clipped, heels striking tile like punctuation. It was Lexa, our head of HR, a woman who wore power suits and spoke in slogans. "Workplace culture is everyone's responsibility," she always said, right before firing someone for attitude misalignment. "Mandy," she said, stopping by my desk. Her tone was calm, too calm. "Let's talk in my office." I followed her down the hallway past the wall of framed motivational posters. Integrity, teamwork, excellence. Words that meant nothing here. Her office smelled like vanilla candles and authority. She gestured for me to sit, then slid a printed paper across the desk. Termination notice. Reason, early departure without manager approval. I blinked. "You sent that to the whole company?" Lexa smiled, small, deliberate. "Transparency is part of our new accountability model." "Transparency," I repeated slowly. "You humiliated me." "It's not personal," she said, rehearsed. "You violated timekeeping policy." "By 2 minutes?" Her smile tightened. "Rules exist for a reason, Mandy. If we make exceptions for one, we lose structure." I wanted to laugh, but it came out like a breath caught sideways. "Structure," I said. "Got it." I stood up quietly. "Then you should probably check your structure. Because those compliance reports you just submitted to the Department of Energy? They still have my name on them." She blinked, thrown off for half a second, then recovered. "That's not relevant." "It will be." I didn't wait for her to reply. I walked out, grabbed my bag, and passed 3 coworkers pretending not to stare. Someone whispered, "I heard it was about theft." Another said, "No, she cursed at HR." Gossip travels faster than logic in a corporate ecosystem. By the time I reached the parking lot, my phone had 47 unread messages and 1 missed call from legal. I ignored them all. At home, I sat in silence. My apartment was small. 1 bedroom, paper-thin walls, and a window view of a grocery store loading dock. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and logged into my personal email. I had a copy of everything: audit reports, time-stamped logs, signed compliance chains. Because after years in this job, you learn to keep receipts, especially when the company you protect doesn't protect you back. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. I just wanted truth. But the thing about truth is, once it's documented, it's unstoppable. At 3:07 p.m., a new message landed in my inbox. From Federal Energy Oversight Agency. Subject, follow-up on compliance logs. Urgent. I froze. They were auditing the grant reports. The ones Lexa had filed using my credentials. The same ones I hadn't signed off on yet. Somewhere between the click of her send button and my name disappearing from payroll, Larkwell had made a fatal mistake. They'd used a non-authorized clearance for a federal contract. I reread the email twice, then leaned back. My heart wasn't racing. My hands didn't shake. Just a strange, heavy calm. I opened the attachment. There, in black and white, was the signature line. Authorized Officer, Mandy Carson. Except I hadn't signed it. I looked out the window at the gray sky. The first drops of rain tapped the glass like punctuation marks. They fired me for leaving 2 minutes early. But they had no idea that, in those 2 minutes, they'd set off a clock they couldn't stop. By Monday morning, my name had become a ghost story whispered between cubicles. "Did you hear about Mandy?" "Yeah, HR blasted her to everyone." Apparently, she was stealing time. Stealing time. The irony almost made me laugh. I woke up early that day, not because I had anywhere to be, but because my body was still wired to start reviewing spreadsheets at 6:30 a.m. The routine felt empty now. No Teams notifications, no corporate chatter, just the hum of my old laptop and the bitter smell of overbrewed coffee. I didn't plan to check my old work email. But when I did, I noticed something strange. The login still worked. HR had deactivated my ID badge, cut my access to payroll, and sent my photo to the entire company. But they hadn't revoked my clearance to the compliance archive. That told me everything I needed to know about their structure. At 9:04 a.m., I opened the system and ran a routine query. Form 22, B Federal Grant, Energy Infrastructure Stabilization, Contract 0415. The access log showed something alarming. The documents had been re-uploaded Friday evening, 1 hour after my termination, with my name still listed as the authorized certifier. The problem? Once a certification form is submitted with an inactive employee ID, it's automatically flagged for a compliance audit, which means the Department of Energy's Oversight Office would be notified. They had triggered a federal audit the moment they hit send. I sat there staring at the screen, realizing the scope of it. If the agency's system had already detected it, someone from the government would show up. Probably not today, maybe later in the week. But soon. I didn't have to do a thing. By 11:22 a.m., the first email came through. From Franklin Marlowe, Chief Operations Officer. To HR Department, Legal Compliance Subject, Urgent, Oversight Visit. Scheduled body. We've received notice that a federal liaison will be visiting the office tomorrow regarding recent contract submissions. Please ensure all documentation is organized and the HR situation with Mandy Carson is fully resolved. They had no idea I could still see everything. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying that ridiculous email they'd sent with my face. How Rachel had avoided my eyes. How Lexa had smiled like it was just another day at work. I wasn't angry anymore, just steady, cold, focused. The next morning at 8:47 a.m., the federal liaison arrived. I wasn't there, but later I'd get every detail from someone who was a quiet message from a friend in legal who'd once trusted me with her resume. She said the man walked in wearing a plain gray suit, no badge visible, holding a thick black binder. He introduced himself simply as Agent Donovan, Federal Oversight and Compliance Division. Franklin greeted him with his usual corporate charm, fake laughter and firm handshakes. Lexa was already waiting in the boardroom, folder in hand, posture perfect. HR's champion of professionalism. According to my friend, they began the meeting with Lexa proudly explaining my termination. She used the same words she'd said to me. Mandy violated our structure by leaving early without authorization. Accountability is key to maintaining integrity. The agent didn't react. He just opened his binder, turned a few pages. Then he said quietly, Miss Carson's signature appears on 6 active grant certifications, including 1 submitted post-termination. Can you confirm she was still employed at that time? Lexa frowned. She was not. But that's irrelevant to the contract itself. He looked up. Actually, that's very relevant. Using the credentials of a terminated employee on a federal document constitutes a misrepresentation under Clause 12.4 of your grant agreement. The room went silent. Franklin shifted in his chair. We didn't realize... The agent interrupted, reading one line aloud from the binder. Any certification submitted under the authority of a non-active employee is grounds for immediate audit suspension and potential funding freeze. The company lawyer, a man named Barlow, who always bragged about his Harvard degree, reportedly went pale. Then, as my friend described, he stood up and shouted, "You have to be kidding me. HR sent that form without clearance." The agent just closed his binder. Then you'll want to speak with HR about that. He left a business card on the table, walked out without shaking hands. And just like that, the silence that followed apparently felt like the end of the world. My friend messaged me later that afternoon. He read one sentence, Mandy. Just one. Barlow screamed. Lexa looked like she'd seen a ghost. I sat in my kitchen rereading that message, the late sunlight stretching across the counter. My half-drunk coffee had gone cold, but I didn't care. The machine had turned on itself, and all I had done was stay quiet. At 5:12 p.m., my work account finally locked me out. Too late. I'd already downloaded every file, every timestamp, every email chain. I stored them neatly in a folder on my desktop labeled Receipts. The company wanted to humiliate me. They wanted to make an example. Instead, they'd become their own case study in arrogance. I closed my laptop and looked at the small photo still taped to my fridge. A picture of me and my team from years ago. Everyone smiling, eyes bright. Back when we believed this place actually cared. Now, I just whispered to the photo, half a smile tugging at my mouth. You wanted transparency, Lexa. Hope you like what's coming. The next morning, I woke up to 32 missed calls and a flood of unread messages. My old coworkers, most of whom hadn't spoken to me in months, were suddenly desperate to reconnect. Hey, Mandy, weird question. Did you ever sign something for the DOE contract? Lexa's freaking out. Something about a funding freeze? You didn't, send anything to the feds, right? I didn't reply to any of them. I just stared at the screen, coffee cooling beside me. The same way someone might watch a building slowly start to collapse in the distance. I hadn't pushed it. I'd only existed exactly as they'd described me. Quiet, invisible, compliant. But that was the thing about compliance. When it breaks, it doesn't scream. It echoes. By 9:10 a.m., the news had hit the internal network. My friend in legal forwarded me a screenshot from the company intranet. It read, "Due to recent administrative discrepancies, all energy infrastructure contracts are under temporary review. Please refrain from discussing this matter externally." Translation: they were in trouble. According to her, the agent, Donovan, had returned early that morning. This time he wasn't smiling. He came with 2 assistants and asked to see the complete audit trail for every document bearing my name. HR scrambled. Lexa claimed she'd already handled the matter, but the assistant pulled up the file metadata in real time. My user ID was still active at the moment of submission. You could have heard a pin drop. Franklin apparently tried to spin it as a technical oversight. The lawyer jumped in with corporate jargon about administrative carryover. But Donovan didn't argue. He just kept writing in his notebook. Finally, he said something no one in that boardroom will ever forget. You distributed an employee's termination notice to external partners while still using her credentials on federal filings. That's not an oversight. That's falsification. My friend said the color drained from Lex's face like ink down a drain. The lawyer whispered something about needing to consult upstairs. Franklin rubbed his forehead and muttered, "How bad is this?" Donovan looked up, calm as a surgeon. "Bad enough that you'll be hearing from our contracts division before lunch." When I read that line in my friend's text later, I didn't smile. I just exhaled. For months, even years, I'd watched that company weaponize policies against people who couldn't fight back. They'd humiliated interns for typos, docked pay for bathroom breaks, written up employees for leaving 5 minutes early. And now, the same system that demanded absolute obedience was turning on them for the same thing. At 11:47 a.m., I received an email from my former manager, Carl. The subject line simply read, "Can we talk?" I almost deleted it, but curiosity won. His message was short. "Mandy, I had no idea they'd gone that far. HR told me you resigned voluntarily. The federal auditors are requesting your original access logs. We can't locate them on the server. If you still have copies, please call me. We're in real trouble." I leaned back in my chair, reread his words twice, then took a slow sip of coffee. For the first time in weeks, it actually tasted good. I didn't call him, but I did reply. "Hi, Carl. Hope you're well. Unfortunately, I'm no longer authorized to assist Larkwell Industries. Please direct all inquiries to federal oversight. Warm regards, Mandy." Within an hour, I got another message, this time from an unfamiliar address, miranda.k@larkwelllegal.com. I remembered her. Junior counsel, quiet, always doing the work others took credit for. She wrote, "Off the record, they're blaming you. Lexa told the board you sabotaged the system out of spite. But the logs prove otherwise. Hold on to whatever you have. You might need it. That line, "you might need it," hit harder than I expected. Because she was right. This wasn't over. By late afternoon, headlines started whispering across internal channels. A local business blog posted an anonymous tip. Major contractor under federal audit after internal HR scandal. They didn't name names, but I recognized the phrasing. Anonymous sources confirmed termination emails were sent publicly before compliance reviews were complete. I watched it spread like a quiet storm. Around 6 p.m., I received one last message. From Rachel, the intern. The same girl who couldn't look at me that morning. She wrote, "I'm sorry." Lexa made me hit send. She said it was just an internal memo. I didn't know your photo was attached. I stared at her words for a long time. My anger softened. Just a little. She was young, scared, replaceable. Just like I had been once. I typed back, "It's okay, Rachel. Take screenshots of everything and back them up somewhere safe. You might need them too." When I hit send, a strange calm washed over me. Outside, the city lights blinked in the distance, cold and mechanical. Somewhere in a fluorescent boardroom, people who once treated me as disposable were now watching their empire unravel one compliance clause at a time. And all I'd done was leave 2 minutes early. By Wednesday, the story had reached the local business press. Larkwell Industries under federal investigation for grant irregularities. No details, no names, just that haunting phrase, grant irregularities. Anyone who's ever worked in corporate knows what that really means. Someone's about to take the fall. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Former colleagues, LinkedIn recruiters, even journalists. I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to talk. I didn't want revenge headlines. I just wanted the truth on record. And the people who weaponized humiliation to feel a fraction of the same exposure they gave me. At 9:12 a.m., my friend Miranda from legal texted again. They're calling an emergency compliance hearing. This afternoon, Franklin, Lexa, and Barlow are all required to attend. Agent Donovan will be there. My hands went cold. She added one more line. They're asking about you. Again, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my laptop. Part of me wanted to go, to walk in and watch their faces crumble when the agent read the words, "Non-authorized use of federal credentials." But that wasn't my job anymore. I wasn't their compliance officer. I was just the woman they'd fired over 2 minutes and a rumor. Still, I couldn't resist logging into the public register of oversight notices. It's open access, if you know where to look. And there it was in the digital bulletin. Notice of audit suspension, Larkwell Industries. Immediate review pending clarification of active named certifier status. Federal funding frozen. That line meant millions of dollars. Frozen. Just like that. I closed the tab and let out a slow breath. The sound of rain against the window filled the silence. For a moment, I felt almost sorry for them. Almost. By noon, Miranda called me. Voice low, whispering like she was hiding in a hallway. They're in the boardroom right now. The agent's binder is out again. You should hear this, Miranda. You shouldn't... I'm muting myself. Just listen. Through the faint static, I could hear the shuffle of papers, a cough, the creak of expensive leather chairs. Agent Donovan's voice was calm, precise. The record shows Miss Carson's credentials were used post-termination to authorize federal submissions. Who approved that? Lex's tone came sharp, defensive. We followed procedure. The documents were completed prior to her termination. There must have been a system delay, Donovan. The timestamp shows upload at 5:18 p.m., 2 hours after her access was revoked. A pause. Then Franklin. That must be a mistake. Our IT team. Barlow cut in, his voice cracking. Do you realize what you've done? You circulated her firing email to external partners, then used her credentials on active contracts. That's not procedure. That's negligent silence. Then Donovan again, softer this time. Negligence would be a generous interpretation, counsel. I heard papers turning, a pen tapping. Per clause 12.4, he continued, this qualifies as a breach of certification integrity. You'll receive a formal penalty notice within 48 hours. Federal funds will remain frozen pending full review. Someone, maybe Franklin, exhaled sharply, like he'd just been punched. Barlow muttered, Jesus Christ. Lex's voice trembled now, stripped of polish. Agent Donovan, with respect, this isn't fair. This started with a minor policy issue. She left early. He cut her off. You humiliated an employee over 2 minutes of time and used her name on $6 million worth of federal paperwork. Fairness is relative. My heart pounded as I listened. I could almost see her expression, that perfectly practiced corporate composure cracking at the edges. Then came the sentence that would later make headlines in every industry newsletter. Effective immediately, Donovan said. Larkwell Industries is suspended from all Department of Energy contracts pending further review. You'll also need to provide documentation explaining why a terminated employee's photo was circulated publicly. That constitutes a data breach, Barlow swore under his breath. Franklin's voice broke. Is there any way to resolve this quietly? The agent replied, You can try, but the report's already filed. My team doesn't do quiet. And that was it. The sound of chairs scraping, paper shuffling, the slow collapse of arrogance. Miranda whispered, He just walked out. I didn't say anything. My throat felt tight. My pulse steady but loud in my ears. Mandy, she added quietly. Lex is crying. I closed my eyes. For a long moment, I didn't know how to feel. I wasn't happy. Not angry either. Just resolved. That afternoon, a news alert hit my phone. Federal oversight suspends Larkwell Industries. Breach of certification integrity alleged. No one mentioned my name, but anyone inside the company would know. That night, I took a walk. No destination, just city blocks and neon reflections on wet pavement. I thought about how easily they'd turned on me, how publicly they'd tried to erase me. And now, because of one careless email, they'd erased themselves. When I got home, another message waited in my inbox. From Miranda, just 2 words. They're done. I sat down, took a long breath, and whispered to the empty room. No, Miranda. They just learned what accountability really looks like. 3 weeks later, the building that once consumed my life looked smaller. Maybe it was the distance, or maybe the illusion of power finally faded once I stopped standing beneath its fluorescent lights. Larkwell Industries, once the self-proclaimed pillar of corporate integrity, now sat under federal investigation, its name quietly removed from half the partnership listings it used to brag about. I hadn't heard from anyone except Miranda. She'd quit 2 days after the hearing. Said the board wanted her to restructure all compliance documentation, but refused to pay overtime or legal counsel to do it. They're still pretending this can be fixed, she'd told me. It can't. She was right. You don't rebuild trust with scented candles and new HR slogans. You rebuild it with honesty, something Larkwell never learned. That Monday morning, a thin white envelope slid through my mail slot. No return address, just my name printed neatly across the front. I turned it over in my hands for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead. Department of Energy, Federal Oversight Division. Dear Ms. Carson, the department acknowledges your role as the original certifying officer on multiple Larkwell Industries grant submissions. Following the completion of our audit, your documentation has been verified as accurate, and your termination has been noted as unrelated to federal performance. We are pleased to inform you that due to your compliance record, you are eligible to serve as an independent consultant on future oversight reviews. Please contact our office if interested. Respectfully, Agent M. Donovan. I must have read it 10 times. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. It was just clean, factual acknowledgement. The kind of truth that doesn't need to shout. But that letter meant everything. It meant my name wasn't a scarlet label anymore. It meant they couldn't bury me under that red marker. Do not rehire. I placed the letter on the kitchen table beside my laptop and just sat there in silence. The sunlight fell across the paper in a soft rectangle, like a quiet apology from the world. At 11:07 a.m., my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Mandy? The voice was rough, tired. It was Franklin. I didn't say anything at first. He cleared his throat. Look, I wanted to call personally. The company's going through restructuring. I know things were... He stopped, searching for words. You didn't deserve what happened. None of it. I let the silence hang just long enough to make him squirm. Then I said, You sent that email to the entire company. He sighed. I didn't. HR did. Lex is gone, by the way. So is Barlow. They resigned after the audit report. But the damage is permanent, I finished. He didn't argue. We lost every federal contract. The partners pulled out. I'm trying to hold things together, but... He trailed off. Anyway, if there's anything I can do, anything you need... I almost laughed. What I needed was respect. That's free, Franklin. There was nothing left to say. He muttered something about wishing me well, then hung up. Afterward, I just sat there, letting the quiet settle around me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even vindicated. Just... done. That afternoon, I printed out the federal letter, slipped it into a clear frame, and set it on my desk. I opened my laptop and drafted an email to Agent Donovan. Dear Agent Donovan, thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to formally accept the consultant role. I've attached references and documentation of my previous audit experience. Sincerely, Mandy Carson. I hovered over the send button for a second. Not because I doubted it, but because I finally understood the weight of calm decisions. Then I clicked. The next morning, I walked to a small co-working office downtown. Nothing fancy, just a few shared desks and a window with light that didn't flicker. I signed the lease for one of the cubicles under a new name, MC Compliance Consulting. On my first day, I brought a mug from home. It read, Integrity, doing the right thing even when HR is watching. At noon, I made a sandwich, turkey, mustard, a little lettuce, and sat at my desk to eat it. No one stopped me. No one stared. No one took photos. Just silence. The good kind. Later that week, Miranda stopped by. She handed me a small envelope. This came to my house by mistake. Probably meant for you, inside was a faded piece of paper, the infamous HR email, printed out, my old badge photo and all. Someone had scribbled over the words, "Do not rehire," and written instead in blue pen. She was right. No signature, just that. I placed it next to the framed letter from the Department of Energy. Two artifacts of the same story. Humiliation turned into proof. Injustice turned into purpose. Sometimes I think about Lexa, about that boardroom, about how one careless email became their undoing. But mostly I think about how fragile dignity is, how quickly it's stolen and how quietly it can be reclaimed. They fired me for leaving 2 minutes early, but in those 2 minutes I gained something none of them ever will. The power of silence backed by truth. I leaned back, took another bite of my sandwich, and smiled. Lunch break. I said to no one in particular. No approval needed.